everybody, your phone stays silent mode or switched off, please. If you need to make a phone call, just pop out and then come back in. I want to thank previous contributions from Councillor Beverly Clark, who has now left this committee, and thank you for your time that was on here, Councillor Clark, and your contributions. And we welcome Councillor Jim Todd onto the committee.
Yeah, he's apologised.
He's actually, I think he's down at the Centre Stage Remembrance at 11. That was a prior commitment. So he's down there at 11. So his apologies are in for today. I think we had that call from Susan. So apologies for today, but it'll be future meetings, I would expect.
Okay, well, welcome Councillor Todd to future meetings. Thank you. We'll call for the Sethering and the apologies, please. And we've got Councillor Todd apologies already.
Yep, thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. When you hear your name, can you confirm your attendance, please? Councillor Mabin?
Present, thank you.
Councillor Cogley?
Present, thank you.
Councillor Richardson? Councillor Canning?
Present, thanks.
We have an apology from Councillor Todd. Councillor McGregor?
Present, thanks.
Councillor Lennox?
Morning here.
Councillor Crawford?
Present.
Councillor Kyle?
Present.
Councillor Hogg?
I'm here, thank you.
And Councillor Watts?
I'm here then, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. We've 4 items on the agenda this morning. The first one is a declaration of interest. Of any declarations of interest from any of the members present, please let me know now. No? No one online? Okay, no declarations of interest. We're now looking at item 2 on the agenda is the previous minutes for the meeting held on 26 September and on the 10th of October. So can I have approval, please? Anyone who was at that meeting, and second, both of those meetings.
I'm happy to approve, Chair. Jennifer here.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg approving and Councillor Richardson seconding. I'm going to assume there's no matters arising from any of these minutes. We're looking now at item 3 in the agenda, which is bonds and financial guarantees update report by Chief Financial Officer. And we have Colin Hastings here with us this morning that's going to take us through that report. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with an update of all the bonds and financial guarantees in place across the council and the management and monitoring arrangements in place for them. The report essentially provides a consolidated position of information provided previously to the Planning Committee and to the Ayrshire Shared Services Joint Committee, but as required under Account Policy Bulletin A Financial Guarantees, this report provides the Governance and Scrutiny Committee with a collective position of all bonds and financial guarantees managed and monitored by relevant services. As part of the monitoring process, the Deputy Chief Executives and Head of Service are required to confirm through the completion of assurance declarations as part of the Council's annual accounts process that all necessary action has been taken by the relevant service to confirm the requirements for bonds or other financial guarantees in respect of contracts under their control, including that appropriate monitoring has been undertaken during the year. A review of the 23-24 declarations show that the bonds and guarantees are detailed within the Governance Service under the Planning Function remit, the Ayrshire Roads Alliance and the People and Culture Service, as detailed in paragraph 9. Paragraph 10 onwards provides summary information regarding performance bonds that are in place as part of planning consent requirements. These bonds tend to take the form of an amount of money required to be transferred to a bank by the contractor or maintained through a policy with an insurance company. These bonds can be called on should the contractor fail to comply with the conditions set out within the contract for which the bond was required. Details of bonds and values and, where applicable, any issues raised as part of inspections are attached as appendices 1 to 5 of the report, presented as per previously to the Planning Committee. Paragraph 20 onwards provides summary information regarding performance bonds that are in place under the remit of the Ayrshire Roads Alliance. These generally relate to roads not constructed by East Ayrshire as the Roads Authority, including those constructed by housing developers, and are designed to cover the cost of constructing the roads should the developer default. The security can take the form of a cash deposit retained by the council or a roads bond. Details of bonds and values across both East and South Ayrshire previously presented to the Ayrshire Shared Services Joint Committee are included in Appendices 6 to 8. Additionally, roads authorities have a power to recover costs arising from excessively heavy damage to roads as a result of major developments, non-residential roads bonds. Details of these bonds are noted at paragraph 31. Paragraph 32 provides detail on the financial guarantee that was provided by the Head of Human Resources in 2017-18 in relation to staff employed by the former West of Loans Scotland Fund, subsequently subsumed into Business Loans Scotland. Legal agreement is in place that any call on the guarantee would be the obligation on all member authorities, not just East Ayrshire as the former host, with a requirement that as part of the operations of the Business Loans Scotland must retain sufficient funding to meet any pension liabilities directly themselves. I'm happy to stop there and take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Colin. I'll open it to the room now. We'll take any questions from elected members. Can I also remind any questions if you can refer to the page and the paragraph if possible, so we can all see where you're coming from. We'll go first to Councillor Richardson. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Colin, just a quick question. Page 18.28, where the South Ayrshire Council area of ARA are in the process of calling in a total of 3 bonds associated with sites and development by Stuart Milner. We all know, unfortunately, that Stuart Milne, the builders, went into administration. So see where ARA hold a bond and a company's gone through the administration sort of liquidation process, where do these bonds rank? So obviously we're going to be a creditor here, aren't we? So where do we rank in the list of creditors? How secure are these bonds? Basically what I'm asking is, how confident are we of getting our money back?
The bonds are effectively full force guarantees. So the money doesn't come from the company that's in trouble. The money comes from the company that granted the bond, having been paid a premium by Stuart Milne in that case.
Right.
So the money's guaranteed.
Right.
On the event of the road not being made up. So the road bonds simply cover that where we undertake that we'll adopt a road at the end of the completion of a housing development. If there's a shortfall in terms of they haven't brought it up to standard, then you can't use public money to perfect privately built roads.
Right.
So if there's a gap for any reason, you would go back to the developer and say you need to deal with X, Y, and Z before we'll adopt your road. And they want the road off their books and onto the council's books. So they usually will do that. As you've identified here, Stuart Milne couldn't complete the works. So it wasn't just about poor workmanship. They couldn't complete the works because they went into insolvency.
Yeah.
In each instance, the liquidator has to make the decision about whether or not a company in insolvency is going to carry on with any contract. And that's a balance of what would it cost to fulfil a contract, what would that bring into the creditor's pot against, and if it's a plus, they might go ahead and finish something off to gain the payment as a liquidator. But the money isn't covered. The bond is a third-party provider. So the insolvency of the Stuart Milne, they would simply have paid the premium to the bond provider.
Right.
And if we can show that they are in breach of the Section 96 agreement or 75 agreement, depending, but usually under the Roads Act, if they can show, and when we can demonstrate that the bond has been triggered, i.e. we've reached the key date and the road's not an adoptable standard and they're not in a position to fulfil it, then we call down the bond that they've paid for. So the insolvency shouldn't impact on the ability to call the bond, because it's not like a mortgage or a floating charge over the assets. It's a third-party guarantee.
So when the third-party guarantee is called up, David, who's the final say on who actually... So Stuart Milne are out the game. Let's just say the road's half completed. Who takes the decision as to which company steps in to complete the road?
Well, we would need to incur the cost, so we would complete it, and then we would offset that against the cost of the bond.
Right.
So if the developer can't physically complete it themselves, we need to instruct somebody, be it our own people or a contractor, to finish the job.
Right.
And the cost of that is set against the bond. And we can't recover more than it costs, but we can recover everything it costs. So,
Okay.
you know, the lessons of 2013 sit with us. They never affected roads bonds. The roads bond situation has always been thus. And normally we don't have to call them, but as you identified, there's 3 called there because they're all related to one company that happened to go into insolvency, which is exactly what they're there to protect against, as well as shoddy and poor workmanship.
No, thanks, Dave. Following that.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson, for the question. I thank you, David, for the reply. Councillor Lennox, and then was you wanting in as well after that, Councillor Cannon? Right, Councillor Lennox, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Colin. Just a couple of points for me, based on page 15. Firstly, paragraph 13 in relation to House of Water and Greenburn open class poll sites. It mentions there an S42 application. I'm just wondering if you could explain to us what an S42 application is. And secondly, at paragraph 15 in relation to the battery energy storage works at South Kilmarnock. I'm just wondering if you can explain to us why we only have a temporary bond in place at the moment for 4.1 million, and why that's not been firmed up, please. Thank you.
I'll take that, Chair, thanks, because they're both planning matters. In terms of paragraph 13, a section 42 application should be familiar to the planning committee as simply an application to vary an existing consent. As that one reads, the section 42 there is retention for the infrastructure works are the subject of section 42 application for the retention for a 10-year period. So they're basically looking to get permission to extend the existence of the railway infrastructure works at House of Water and Greenburn. So that's simply an application to vary, and it will go through the planning process and will either be determined under delegation or will go to the planning committee as appropriate. But it's just an application to vary an existing consent. And in relation to 15, the temporary one with the Zenobia Bez is actually an escrow temporarily while they put the bond in place. Escrow is actually higher protection than bond because escrow is money in bank. So at the moment, through their choice, while they're negotiating the most favourable bond terms they think they can get, they have as a temporary measure to fulfil their obligations, put the same amount on escrow until such time it's replaced with a bond. So we've actually got, yes, it's temporary, but it's a higher level of protection than a bond because the money's there when you need it, as opposed to having to call it off from a bond provider. So we have kept chasing them. I've seen emails. I know colleagues continue to pursue them in the sense of just asking what their programme is, but there's no great priority for us because, as I said, escrow is actually a tighter arrangement than even the bonds, which is not to suggest the bonds are not tight, but escrow's the top of the tree, if you like. So the temporary arrangement is actually a betterment for us until they get the bond in place, but the bond is still more than satisfactory. Just to remind members, it goes back to 2013 in the back of the open cast. Council looked at all of this in great detail, and in May of 13 set out its stall in terms of further review of the delegated arrangements and the bonding arrangements, and everything in this paper flows from the decisions then. So the Council already has approved those types of bonds and guarantees that are acceptable to us, and those kind of providers who are acceptable to us, usually the AAA. So we are quite prescriptive in whose bonds and guarantees we'll take, and we're quite prescriptive in the form of them now in terms of current arrangements, having learnt the very severe lessons of the past. So everything that came from 2013 is reflected in these arrangements now as written up in the EPB that's referred to, but the history of this goes back to 11 years ago.
Thank you, Councillor Lennox, for the question, and thank you, David, for the reply. Councillor Cogley, and then we'll go to Councillor Canning.
Thank you very much. I have a question in relation to paragraph 16, which is on page 16, and the appendix that goes along with that, which is appendix 3 on page 24. And this talks about the restoration financial guarantee on single and dual wind turbines. And I can see there's Appendix 3 has a list of different, I suppose, relatively domestic turbines. And the restoration financial guarantee says that there wasn't a bond required at the time of approval. Have we had, noting the comments in paragraph 16, have we had any problems in relation to this? And has the legislation changed? So if such a planning application for one of these sorts of turbines was going through now, would there be a requirement to pay a bond? Sorry, that was a bit long-winded.
No, the bottom line is I think local policy reflected national policy. So when the wind turbines were first appearing, they weren't perceived to have the same risk as members will have heard me explain before. If you go back to the open cast scenario, then the purpose and function of a bond was very, very different. The way, and apologies to those who know this, but the way the open cast worked was you would cut a trench, you would take the coal out, you would put from the first trench the spoil at the end of everything you're going to coal. You would then cut the second trench and you would backfill the first trench as you take the coal out the second trench. And then you would go to the third and backfill the second, so that when you get to the end, the idea was you've taken the coal out the 10th trench and you backfill that from the spoil from the first one that you've put at the end. The bond profiling was meant to reflect what's the exposure if that coal operator at any time fails, goes into insolvency like we talked about a moment ago. If they're no longer there and they're no longer coaling, what's the likely exposure? And if they've been doing everything they were meant to be doing, excuse me, then the likely exposure should only ever have been they were halfway through a trench and halfway through backfilling the previous trench. So the bond reflects the likely cost incurred to make good. So the bond was always pitched at filling in the last trenches in terms of the consented programme for the restoration that was part of the application and the consent process. What happened in practice is if they're not backfilling and they're not backfilling and you've got 10 trenches and the spoil's just all over and dumped anywhere in the site and all the rest, it has happened in some cases. When you get to the end, there's no material to backfill, and if they then fail to backfill, the exposure is the whole trench, while the bond was profiled at what was anticipated to be the maximum cost if things had been kept to the consented programme of restoration. Against that, the wind turbines are a different kettle of fish, but they were just coming to the fore in 2013, and the concerns were, and there was, I think, anecdotal tales of the first wind turbines in Hawaii coming to the end of their life, and pictures being painted of turbines hanging and blades hanging and not being in use. That reality has never materialised because, quite simply, these turbines generate money as well as electricity. It's as simple as that. So in terms of the risk assessment, if somebody has a turbine that's making them money, the chances that they're just going to stop and using that and keeping that maintained in order to generate that income and generate that electricity is a different risk from what was happening in the open cast. In terms of national policy, we can't apply any greater onus than national policy. So there was a gap when these were first coming forward as ones and twos, and that gap has now been closed. So yes, if future applications come in, or not future, from a point in time, I can't remember how many years ago now, but for a number of years, we have been able to require the bonds, and that's reflected in the mixed reporting. But the earliest single or dual turbines won't have bonds. You can't retrospectively now apply a requirement for bonds on a live consent, but if anyone comes in, as we've seen for a Section 42 or a new application to extend the life, then you would condition it. So if somebody comes in to extend the life of an existing single turbine, we can put the bond requirement on in the next cycle, because that now reflects policy. So it was national policy, it wasn't really seen this as a priority. Local policy reflected national policy. They changed the approach and allowed you to bond even single turbines, and we've been applying that since we could. We'll apply it and do apply it to all new applications, and we will apply it to any coming in to extend the life of those that currently don't have them. So that's the position there.
I could just go back. So back to the appendix then, Appendix 3, pages 24 and 25. So is it right then to assume that, say, in 10 years' time, when these various smaller wind turbines come to the end of their lives and they're replaced by something else, the comment here, not required at time of approval, will that gradually sort of fade out then? Is that what one would anticipate?
I would hope, yeah, depending, whether they're consented for 25 years or now some of them are moving to 40 years, depending when they come to the end of the first consent. If they don't continue with them, they're still planning protection. So if somebody comes to the end of the consent and doesn't come in to extend it, it's planning enforcement, which includes the obligation to take the single turbine down. What we're finding, as I said, is whether it's large wind farms or single turbines, folk are quite happy with arrangements and they are looking to continue. As each one of these comes in, but it might be what I'm flagging up as it might be 25 years, it might be 30 years, but as each one comes in for an extension, then we will then put the bond requirement on to any future consent or extension of the consent. We can do it then because it's like taking a new decision, but we can't retrospectively apply a further condition or obligation on an existing consent. So yes, whatever the last one of these is in terms of the duration of the consent, and I see we don't have those in the list, but we have all the detail in the system, and as each one of these, as and when they come in to extend, we would then put a bond requirement on per the current policy, and if they don't come in to extend, we will be sending Tom Dickey and Colin Graham out to get them to take it down.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cogley and David, for the reply. Councillor Canning.
Thanks for that, David. It's I think Beverly's missing a trick not joining the not staying in the government scrutiny because it's an education. As always, thanks for that, David. I suppose the thing I wanted just to say was that, and David kind of covered it in terms of the people that give the bonds or hold the escrows are normally financial institutions. As David said, usually AAA or got low credit default swap rates. But the what was I going to say? Yeah, we still need due diligence on them because at the end, because I mean, banks are popping up everywhere these days with deregulation. So, you know, those financial institutions that might have typically provided them might not be the same as the ones now. So we still need due diligence on those financial institutions. But that's for members' benefit because I know David and myself will be, and I'm doing that already. That was one point. And I suppose just going back to the bonds, I mean, I think, you know, again, and David knows this, but I mean, if we get nuclear fusion in 10 years' time, we're going to have a bunch of wind turbines that nobody wants. So at least we've got bonds to take them down because we don't know the future. Yeah, thanks.
Oops. Thank you, Councillor Canning. Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Peter. It was just a question, David. I was interested about it's just from my own out of my own interest, this question, but I was interested when David was talking about at the end of a 25-year term, you know, a wind turbine or a wind farm for whatever reason comes to the end of its life, and you know, the owner has to take the bit that you see above ground down. I'm all for wind turbines personally. I think they're one of the best things since sliced bread. But one of the questions about them when they first started to appear was that what you see above the ground is only half the story. That obviously it needs a base, and there's tons of concrete get put into the ground to keep the thing solid. Obviously, a base. It needs a base, and that's tons and tons of concrete. Are there any requirements on owners about that, David, or does the concrete just stay there forever?
No, we sorry, Chair, through you. That's one of the negotiating points. A number of hours was spent haggling over the need to remove the underground cabling and the concrete. I suppose it's all about the environmental perspective, and I suppose there are two schools of thought. One is restore it to its natural state. The other one is if the concrete's there and it's inert, is it actually causing any further harm, and what's the impact? Because to get that concrete in the ground, the chances are you dug out a whole load of peat and put it somewhere else. So if you don't have it to fill back in, are you just leaving bigger holes? So there's no one approach, but generally the ask is that the platforms and that come out. So there's a level of restoration. You've then also got to think of the worth of digging up and taking out all the cables, and what's the effect of leaving underground cables? Are they going to affect the water course and environment or not? And if not, then what's the value in taking them out? So generally speaking, and the number I've seen, we were haggling over those kind of costs and the inclusion of those costs, but the general approach is to seek the removal of the turbines above the ground, the concrete in the platforms, and the cabling in most instances, on the basis that it should be true restoration back to the natural state. But as I've said, you need to watch that doesn't then create further complication, because what does that look like if you've had to alter the natural state on a permanent basis to put the concrete in the ground before you put the turbines up? But generally speaking, yeah, it would cover all those costs.
Thanks for that answer, Dave. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Any other questions? Nothing online? Can I ask myself, I mean, the bond idea originally started up with the open cast, and we've had conversations about that in the past at previous meetings. Do we get to a stage where the work is complete and everything is restored, and then what happens to the bond? Is the bond returned to whoever owned it or back to the financial institution, and that's the bond closed, it's gone?
The bonds all have a fixed period, and we've got much tighter periods now. So for all the wind farms, the desire used to be longer term, to say revisiting and reviewing it, but actually with the wind farms, the market is such and the cost of them is such that operators and developers prefer to have shorter life bonds and do the reviews. So it's actually a 5-year cycle in terms of the wind farm bonds. And we review and renew every 5 years, because obviously on a 40-year life or even a 25-year life at a wind farm, the costs of that removal. So it's back to, if you take the example I gave of the open cast, in that shift in liability depending on how they actually deliver it, and the bond's been constructed based on the delivery of the true programme rather than what was actually happening or not happening in site. If you apply that to the wind farm scenario, then, as I say, they're renewing the bonds every 5 years. The obligation is to provide bonds for the duration of the consent and any restoration period, so 40 plus 5 or whatever. So there'll be a bond in place and an obligation of a bond in place and a 5-year cycle for the duration of the consent. If they come in to extend the consent, then there'll be a new bond requirement for the life of the new consent. So the bond lives alongside the consent, and once they've fulfilled their obligations under the consent, the bond can be, if it's still got any life left, discharged, or just won't be renewed at the end of the 5 years. We can only call them if they're in breach. They're only in breach if they've hit a trigger that they've failed to meet, i.e. their 40 years is up, they haven't applied for an extension and they haven't started taking it down. We'd serve the notice that says take them down. If they don't take them down by a given period, we put the contractors in, take them down, and it'd be paid for by the bond. So the timing and length and duration of the bond is absolutely linked to the length and duration of the consent plus the restoration obligations within a 2 or 3 year period at the end of the consent, should the consents come in. And I take Councillor Cannon's point in terms of we don't know what might happen, but the experience to date, and for those members who are on the planning committee, you'll know that what we are seeing is applications for maybe fewer but bigger and taller turbines and longer blades, and for extended consents. So the general approach at the moment of the industry has been to continue to seek to extend consents whilst also maybe reducing the numbers but growing the size. That doesn't mean it will carry on another 30, 40 years, accept that, but that's what we're dealing with just now, and that's what we're managing.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you, Colin, for bringing the report. If there's no other questions, I'm going to go back to the recommendations in paragraph 2. Note the detail of the financial bonds managed and monitored by the council and the work undertaken to resolve and rectify any issues. Note the information relating to the financial guarantee provided to the Strathclyde Pension Fund, and otherwise note the contents of the report. Noted, colleagues?
Yep.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is financial measurements on capital works contracts for the period 1st April to 30th September. And that's going to David Mitchell. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. As members know, this was born of a consideration of previous scrutiny arrangements, whereby it was noticed that we routinely have always produced reports on, as members of this committee know, the award of contracts. As members are also know that in terms of capital works contracts, if they are overrunning by more than 10%, there's an obligation to go to Cabinet for Cabinet approval for that additional expenditure, but there's a margin up to that 10% that isn't then or wasn't previously reported on. That is what this is intended to address. So we bring this report twice a year, and what it simply sets out for the members' consumption and public consumption is the actual outturn on all our capitals contracts that have come to an end, full completion within the reporting period. I think members will be familiar that there is this general perception, you know, that council contracts are always dearer and always overrun. And the point of this report is that it's dangerous to generalise, and what members see is the actual, and what the public see is the actual outturn on each and every works contract, not just the ones that maybe hit that 10% threshold, and that's usually for good reason. So it's out there as part of the openness and transparency and accountability, and it lets folk actually see the true outcomes on each and every works contract. And as members can see for themselves, and I've seen in previous reports, it's absolutely not the case that they all overrun. Thanks, Chair. Happy to take any particular questions on any particular items.
Thank you, David. Any questions? Councillor Richards.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Peter. David, it's just a really quick question. I know you'll have the answers for it. It's page 39, 1.1 education, and it's about the re-roofing and internal repair works to the gym block at Patna Primary School. Why is there any under original estimated cost? Because I would have expected before the council puts a contract like that out there for tenders that we would have had our own, you know, clerks of works or facilities management people out to sort of review the job and basically estimate how much the cost to fix it's going to be, so that we know roughly in the ballpark where the tenders should come back in. But in that one we didn't actually have an estimate for the cost ourselves. Or maybe I just wonder why there's an NA in that box.
See, you cursed me when you said you knew the answer. Generally speaking, there is an indicative figure. We'll build up the estimates, but sometimes it just depends on the nature of the job and how we go out to tender, and sometimes depending. That must, you know, they don't always do that exercise. What's important is the figures in the next two columns. What did we contract for, and what did we end up paying? And using that one as an example, yes, you can see there was a 22% overspend in that sense, 124,000. But what it tells us is it's not just about that estimate. Sometimes, as members will know, when you actually get into jobs, then it becomes clear that actually the scope of the works should be increased to make sense on a best value basis, because it's better to go and fix something you've found when you open up walls, etc., or in this case roofs, to fix something else rather than do the job you were paid to do and then come back in another 6 months and do another bit of the job. So the additional prelims costs would probably mean the required to call down a bit more than was anticipated. The revised electrical would suggest that they've increased the spec of the works once they've got in amongst the wiring, and then the additional decoration works probably flowed from any extra electrical work and would increase the areas that needed to be reinstated through, you know, a refresh of the decoration if you're opening up additional walls. So it's not always just about overspend. Oh, we agreed the contractor would do X, Y and Z for the price of A, and he does X, Y and Z but charges us more than A. Sometimes for a whole load of reasons we will agree to increase the spec, or the other works make sense to be carried out at the same time. So there is an increased cost, but there's actually an increased additionality in terms of the specification of the works that are in scope. So I'll find out. I'll ask the question as to why they don't always have their own estimate, but I think sometimes with the nature and the scale of the job, it's just as quick and effective if it's out to quick quotes to get it straight out, and then you know, to be clear, as long as you're clear in the specification of what we're asking folk to do and what they're asking us to pay them if we ask them to do it, then those are the main aims. So I'm not quite sure why they didn't actually have an original estimate. There can be, it's not the first time that's happened. It does happen on occasion. But as I say, the main thing is that colleagues in these services are managing the contracts, that they understand the contracts, that they know what we've asked the contractor to do, that they can make sure that's been done before we pay for it, and that we're paying the agreed contractual rate with no extras. That's the function of the contract management, and that's where we can deliver the best value for the council by just holding the contractors to the contract. But I don't. I can ask in that one in particular. But there are occasions when it's just for whatever reason. It may well have been. I'm trying to remember. Was partner not an emergency? Was it not just the rain came in one day? So maybe timescale's the other issue. If we don't have the time to muck about and go and do our estimates, and we need to get folk in quite quickly, and again, without grasping at straws, I actually do think that the partner one was a bit of an urgent one.
That could well be the explanation there. I mean, if there's been a storm, as Councillor Lennox says, and the roof's blown off the gym block and the rain's coming in, then I could understand maybe why that step was missed out. It was just when you see it's ended up in an overspend, a 22% overspend, and I just wondered why the council didn't do its estimate. But an emergency, that could well be the explanation.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson and David, for the reply. We've got Councillor Hogg online, has got a question.
Thanks, Chair. Not a question. I can update you on the partner because it is in Doon Valley. It was caused by people riding their bikes on the roof, which caused irreparable damage, water ingress, and it did become an emergency. When they started getting into the work, it became a lot more than they anticipated, hence the increased costs. So I can answer that one for you, David. There you go.
Thank you, through you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Hogg.
Yeah, thank you.
For your in-depth knowledge.
I'm trying to imagine how people manage to get bicycles up on a roof. But there's another one I would like to ask myself. It's the biggest overspend in this paper on page 41. And I'm sure we've two new Cumnock councillors here. So I'm sure they probably know something about this. It's the demolition at Glesnock Street in Cumnock, tendered at 150,000, and the final amount's been 255. It's a 69% overspend. So I don't know if you want to comment on how that's happened.
Yeah, this has just been this is the long running saga that involved the road closures. So the starting point there was you had buildings in no, I'm away in the wrong one. Sorry. I'll need to find out. I'm thinking of Townhead Street. I'll need to get you that information. That's a different one. No, it is. It's the shoring works. Bottom line is, this started. The council didn't own anything in the block. The Chinese restaurant had burnt out. There was disowned, or there was at least one flat where they'd no insurance. So nothing was happening in terms of the private owners fixing the eyesore that was that block with the burnt out Chinese restaurant sitting there, shuttered, etc. The council took a proactive approach, which was to seek to acquire those property interests and to knock down that block. It's just because it says Glazing Street. I was at Townhead Street, but anyway, we're talking about the former TCs and where the car park is, etc., across the road from Farm Foods. So we initially took a long time trying to get everyone's agreement, because you've got at least one owner there that's got negative equity. He still owed money in the property, but he didn't have any insurance for the fire. So you had all those problems to overcome, but we eventually managed to consolidate and acquire the title to the whole block. We then brought in the demolition contractor. I was watching the programme last night, and Lord Lucan, who they called Lucky, but he could have his hand in this because there wasn't any luck around this. So we brought in the demolition contractor, and the plan was we'll knock down the block that was burnt out, and we will take the opportunity to expand the car park there that's in and out off Ayr Road, and it gives the opportunity to open up onto Townhead Street at the front, so it would actually be an in and out rather than an in and out of Ayr Road. So it's an improvement to the car park, and that seemed a reasonable solution. I think members understand the council can't buy up every burnt out property where there's no private solution, but if you can do something, then fine. So the idea was acquire it, which we did, knock it down and form the car park. Having acquired that, which we didn't set fire to or own, but we're looking to fix, we then brought in the demolition contractor. Initially, they went on site the week of COVID. So that's the next strike. They go on strike the week of COVID, and we have to slow down. So there's a bit of an impact there. But in the end, they also realise that, in fact, because we're bringing that down, you've got a gable end solution required, so that complicated it a wee bit because you're bringing down half that block and then you need to have a finish to that. So that was part of it, and we were in discussions over that before we put them back on after COVID. Then we got them back on after COVID. Then they started bringing the whole building down, and just as they're getting to the end, they realised that the facade of the building next door, which was the former TC's bar, lovely sandstone facade, was coming away at the top, and therefore was triggering section 29 of the dangerous buildings legislation, which council sits with. We then, this is a good one, this. We then get into discussions with who we thought was the owner of the TC's building, because wearing our building standards hat, it's, we've had the contractor in. We haven't caused this, honestly. We didn't cause this, but our demolition contractor's telling us you've got a problem with your facade. It's coming away at the top, it's dangerous. Can we get permission to go in? And this chap, we're in a public session, but an individual did come forward and identify himself as the owner of the building and kindly gave us permission to go in and do surveys, etc., so we could work out what might need to be done in terms of dealing with that building and what would have been at his cost. And then it turned out that the building was ownerless, another one of those, like the voids and so on and so forth. So the building was ownerless because the company that owned it had simply been dissolved at Companies House, and you've all heard this before, had been dissolved without that building being dealt with. So if the company disappears, they're the name and the title, no company, no owner, nobody to deal with the facade next door. So we've been to Cabinet on that one, and we identified the money, and we then went through the Companies House process. We've acquired title to the pub, so not only do we run the licensing board, we now will be running a pub shortly. We got the money approved from Cabinet to then fix the facade. That was another 300,000, but the last time the building changed hands, it was 315,000. I'm currently working to put a tenant in with the council holding the licence. If we can get it tenanted and get the pub working again, then it's a good regeneration outcome because it was a pub before, so we're back where we were, and we will be able to hopefully transfer and sell on, market and sell the pub building that we now own by default with a sitting tenant, and the hope would be, my aspiration is that we will hopefully cover the cost of fixing all of this. So we went in to fix a problem that wasn't ours. We identified another problem that wasn't ours but became ours because there was no one else to own it. We've fixed that as well. They're currently doing the gable end finish because they had to do the facade retention and strengthening all the works they did to fix the building. Now they're doing the gable end, and then we've still got the contract to come for the expansion of the car park, which went out to the papers. Simon did an update for the papers, I think from memory. This week it was January to March 25 to get the whole lot completed. So that demolition contract, as I say, started with fixing the Chinese restaurant, then the gable end, then hold on a minute, we need to fix that. That was a CBC Stone, that was a different contractor to fix that. We had to take the time to acquire that, etc., etc. So sorry, but there's a whole load of reasons why that one has become a lot more protracted, and none of them, and the only reason I'm taking this length of time with the answer, Chair, is to be absolutely clear, none of them are of the council's own making. The original decision was a bold one to step in and use public money to fix that situation, but we took that decision and we will conclude in that, and we've had to deal, because of Section 29 Building Standards Authority, we've no choice, but we can't ignore the building next door. So I'm hoping that we will see this through. The works on the facade aren't included there. That was a separate package of works, but the demolition contract, as you can see, they've been on and off site several times, and the scope of this has changed as we've found that the building next door was also falling down. So hopefully that covers it, and apologies for the length, but as I said, there's a bit of a history to that one. But we are still working with some local boys whose dads used to be involved in the licensed trade and that used to operate in those premises, and we have negotiated heads of terms for a lease, and I'm hoping to see them get in there sometime around about March next year, once they're set up, and we're giving them a rent-free period. So there is a good news story that will get them in there on a long lease. The downside of that is, as during COVID, the chappie that thought he owned the building, and I'll put it no higher than that, was also taking rent off them when in fact he didn't own it and he wasn't the landlord, and he'd no right. And indeed, he was taking the rent he would no right to, even when they were shut during COVID. So we're trying to help them get back on their feet as well. So there'll be communications about this when we've got everything lined up. But that's the background as to why that contract has gone, not awry, but has gone in an unintended and unanticipated direction, because it's the site that just keeps on giving.
Quite a simple remedy.
Yeah. Thank you very much, David Mitchell. I think that was absolutely brilliant and well done. So now East Ayrshire Council accidentally owns a pub through no fault of our own.
Yeah, and as soon as we get it up and running, we'll get it sold.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Councillor Richardson.
David seems to be in a rush to sell it. We could launch our own range of craft beers and before long have a whole chain. It would make some money.
Joking apart, we'll be marketing it. If there is no market for it, then we might find that we're in the pub landlord business for a bit longer than we anticipated. So anything's possible these days.
Okay. Stephen. Councillor Canning.
I'll be brief. Just reminding me, David, about lobbying. Talked about lobbying Companies House, because that's ridiculous that, you know, they can set up companies to own properties and then just walk away, and it's going to get worse. Yeah, cost of living crisis. Sorry. And the only second thing was, if you want to see how to ride a bike on a roof, Google Danny McCaskill. He's a Sky cyclist, and you would not believe what he does. So if you want, I'm serious, if you want to ride a bike on a roof, then Google Danny McCaskill.
Thank you, Councillor Canning. Right, we'll go. Where are we now?
Recommendations, Chair.
Yeah, back to the recommendations. Thank you. Paragraph 2. I think it's just not the contents of the report, if I'm right.
Yep.
All happy with that? Not the contents
Yes.
of the report. Thank you. And I'll ask Robert to stop the recording, please. Oh, sorry, hold on.
No,
Councillor Lennox.
just before you put the hammer down and close the meeting, just one on a personal note. Earlier in the year, we all did the carbon literacy training, and as part of my personal commitment to try and get certification, I've made a commitment to try and encourage as many members as possible to stop taking hard copies of the papers for meetings. I've done that myself, and I'm managing to girdle away. Sometimes you've got to bring your notebook to take notes and stuff like that, but it's helping save the planet in a big way. So I would encourage as many members as possible to stop taking their hard copies and start to get a digital copy for the meetings. Thank you, Chair.
Noted, Councillor Lennox. Thank you very much. Councillor Canning.
Very briefly, I agree with Willie, and obviously I don't have any papers, but I only found out very recently that we've actually got a touch screen on our computer, which is actually much easier to scroll up and down in, because I was using the thing at the side and you keep losing your place, but so you can actually use it. I was maybe the last one to realise that, but just for information.
Thank you, Councillor Canning. We'll end the meeting there, and we're going into a workshop. So we'll end the recording, Robert. Thank you.